Does coronavirus actually exist? Did it originate from a US army base? Is it no worse than the flu? Did China from the start handle the virus outbreak swiftly and effectively? If you find yourself asking these questions, you've been in contact with a massive propaganda campaign from China and Russia aimed at spreading misinformation about the virus. So why is it that at such a crucial point for countries to work together and fight a global pandemic, a new battle has emerged? One aimed at destabilising geopolitics as we know it.
Coronavirus first emerged in the Chinese city of Wuhan.
China's senior leadership, who continue to churn out propaganda.
They made a statement that our soldiers brought it into China. No, it came from China.
Dr. Andrew Foxall, Director of Research at the Henry Jackson Society, explains what myths China and Russia are putting out there, what kind of disinformation campaigns each country has enacted in the past, and why they are spreading these falsehoods now.
The key myth China is seeking to spread is that its authorities did a good job at controlling the initial outbreak of COVID-19 and that they did so using authoritarian methods that are not available to the liberal democratic West. This is a message repeated across China's domestic and international media, by its ambassadors and embassies, and in some Western media. This myth seeks to convince you that China is telling the truth. Russia, by contrast, has created multiple myths about COVID-19, many of which are contradictory. Pro-Kremlin media has, for example, claimed both that COVID-19 is no more serious than the common flu and that COVID-19 does not actually exist at all. The reason for this is that these myths are not intended to convince you of one particular truth, but instead to confuse you as to whether there is such a thing as truth. But there is one myth that both China and Russia are putting out there and are pushing hard. This is the myth that COVID-19 originated not in China, but in the United States. For China, it is obvious why. If COVID-19 did not originate in China, then criticism of the Chinese Communist Party's woeful and incompetent response to the initial outbreak is unfair. For Beijing, as well as for Moscow, undermining the global stature of the West, led by the United States, is a key foreign policy goal.
Look, China has taken advantage of the United States until I came here.
China has long waged a propaganda war on the West. It has sought to whitewash the estimated 45 million people who starved in the blood-soaked Great Leap Forward between 1958 and 1962. It has sought to convince the world that Taiwan is not an independent country, but instead a province of China. And it has sought to convince the world that the million or so Uyghurs that have been forcibly relocated in Xinjiang are not in concentration camps, but instead in re-education facilities. Moscow has been waging a disinformation war against the West since at least 2014, and it has honed its efforts through the annexation of Crimea, invasion of eastern Ukraine, destruction of Malaysian Airlines flight MH17, and attempted murder of Sergei Skripal. Each of these was accompanied by a concerted disinformation campaign. Of course, much of what Russia is currently doing mirrors what the Soviet Union did during the Cold War. Then, as now, disinformation was an integral part of how the Kremlin operated. China and Russia are pushing coronavirus myths for different reasons. For China, its propaganda offensive is an attempt to primarily do two things. Firstly, to obscure the Chinese origins of COVID-19. And secondly, to convince the world that it should be grateful for all that China has done and is doing to halt the spread of COVID-19. For Russia, its disinformation campaign is an attempt to exploit societal divisions, sow confusion, and undermine democratic cohesion wherever possible, whether in healthcare systems, national governments, or multinational institutions. But both countries are now using similar tactics, and they are learning from each other.